We're just about ready to move on to week 4 of the fantasy football season. So which players are going to be the hottest waiver wire pickups and which injuries do you really need to know about? Stay tuned and you'll find out. Welcome back, Endgame community. I'm Pierre, here to help you once again with some waiver wire recommendations and also some injury news. So let's get to it. Let's start with the good news. Garrett Wilson, who you probably spent up on last week, was the top waiver wire pickup. Looked like Rookie of the Year candidate early on, and he did leave this game early. At first suspected it was concussion, but then we found out later it was a rib injury. But he did come back, and looks like he won't even miss a beat, so no problem there. T. Higgins, also in a similar way, he definitely was in the concussion protocol, except that he really wasn't because he came back in right away as well. And this is something that really seemed to happen a lot in week 3. And I'm not even going to mention Tua because you know that Tua Tagovailoa did come back and lead the Dolphins to another victory over Buffalo. But man, it sure looked like he should have been in the protocol. Maybe he shouldn't have come back. I mean, he looks fine, but still, you don't know the long-term effects here. But the bottom line is those guys did clear. They're back to play in that same game, and they should be good to go for next week. All right, some big-name running backs, starting with Dalvin Cook. And I know what a lot of you are thinking, here we go again, and it's the same injury again. That shoulder, he dislocates it, and this is what happened late last year. Let a lot of people down during the fantasy playoffs. Okay, so here's the thing. Dalvin Cook left the game, did not come back, but earlier reports indicate that he'll be good to go. He's going to wear a brace. He's going to make the trip to London, which is where they play next week against New Orleans, and he should be on the field. So here's the thing. I know it's tempting to just fade him, sit him, but if he's good to go, he probably should still be in your lineup. And Alexander Mattison, you know that's what you have him rostered for. Don't go crazy if it's on the waiver wire because you know what? He might not even be the starter. It's always smart to have him as an insurance policy. But again, this looks like it might not be as bad as we first thought. David Montgomery, same thing here. Now, his backup had a lot bigger game than Madison, and I will talk about Khalil Herbert in just a minute. But first, let's talk about the Montgomery injury. He left early in the game with an ankle injury, and we didn't know the severity. He never came back, and that's what led to Herbert's big game. But now we're hearing that he is, quote-unquote, good. All right, so it's possible that he doesn't miss time either. He's listed as day-to-day, and we may not see Montgomery miss a start. So keep that in mind before I get to my waiver wire pickups. And then in New Orleans, start with Michael Thomas. Look, I hate to say this, but before the season, I kind of joked, but not really. Said it's not a matter of if, but when he gets hurt. And sure enough, he left this game with a toe injury. Now, we don't know if it's serious. Probably not. But the thing is, you never know with Thomas because first it was ankle and now it's toe. So he did leave the game. He might be questionable going into next week. So just be aware of that. Also, the team does travel to London. But here's the thing. It wasn't just Thomas. Almost every Saints receiver got hurt in this game. Jarvis Landry left early with an ankle injury. And also Traquan Smith, who had a huge game somehow, probably because the other two guys got hurt. And then he left with a concussion. So that leads us to our top waiver wire pickup of the week. But first, let me also tell you, not that this matters so much because you're starting him in fantasy, but Mac Jones, lower leg injury. Now, he also left. It was the very end of the game with that similar kind of ankle, but his looked worse. He was hobbling off the field, could barely walk, and didn't, of course, in Patriots fashion, give any information about it, didn't meet with the media, and we will not know much, but it sounds like they're preparing for him to miss a game. Why does this matter? You're not starting Mac Jones unless you're in a really deep Superflex league, but it does matter for his receivers because this could mean we see a lot more of the running game, and this is already a run-heavy offense. A guy like Devontae Parker, who just had a huge game, maybe not viable anymore. So who are the top pickups heading into week 4? Let's start with the obvious, and that is Chris Olave in New Orleans. And look, after last week where he got this huge target share, you'd think he would have been picked up most leagues, but he wasn't because right now across Yahoo leagues, he's only owned in 2/3 of leagues. That means there's a lot where he is out there floating out there, available on the waiver wire. You know, every league is different. Some people play in more shallow leagues. Some people just get impatient and cut players that need somebody. So the point is, if Olave is out there, you go grab him. It wasn't just they had a big game. And yeah, you could say, well, all those Saints receivers were hurt, so of course he had to go off. But this is the second week in a row that he's gotten 13 targets. That is a huge target share for any receiver, much less a rookie. And we know that with Jameis Winston, he will go to his wideouts first and foremost. That's why we're seeing Alvin Kamara get less involved as a pass catcher. That's why this offense is more aggressive. Okay, so if Olave is out there as the number one guy already, Just the fact that those other receivers are questionable or may not go, that just makes it all but guaranteed he's going to be the top target on this team. He is an absolute stud. We knew this going in to the draft process. He was going to be one of the top prospects. He did land in a good spot, so Olave right now looks like a prime pickup in all formats. All right, now on to the Bears running back, and I'm talking about Khalil Herbert. So you know it is a struggle to find any running back out there that's even viable to roster, much less start. Khalil Herbert looks like he might be that guy. Now, here's the thing. He had a monster game. 157 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns on 20 carries. He got those 20 carries because David Montgomery basically didn't play the majority of the game. Will that happen again? It's too soon to say, of course, but the thing is, Montgomery, it sounds like it's not serious. He might be out there. But on the other hand, we can see that Herbert has been so good, and he's been effective in the time he's gotten the ball too. He's probably earned himself more touches, and or the team might just be more careful with Monty because of the injury. So it looks like he might have some standalone value. And at the very least, of course, if Montgomery doesn't play or down the road something happens, you got a really strong insurance policy. Here's the thing with Herbert, though. Beware is number one, don't empty the wallet to get him because, of course, like I said, Montgomery might still play. It's not like he's out for the season. The other thing is what Herbert doesn't do is catch passes, like at all. He's great on the ground. He's not a pass catching guy. And so the thing is, that gives you a low floor. If he struggles running, doesn't get in the end zone, you might be left wanting for more, okay? And this Chicago offense, not exactly lighting it up. So at least we know they'll commit to the run. At least we know in a standard league, he's a really strong RB3, potential for RB2. Again, if Montgomery's not there. But don't go crazy. He's not going to be a league winner. This is not the next James Robinson or anything like that. All right, next up is a guy that Chris and I were both really high on all throughout draft season, and it looks like he's finally paying off. Third game here, Russell Gage. Now, of course, it took a Mike Evans suspension and a Chris Godwin injury for Gage to go off. Now, you might say that's not going to happen again. Evans should be back next week, and then in a couple weeks, pretty soon, Godwin will be back. Maybe Julio even makes an appearance. Who knows? But Russell Gage is a strong pick anyways, okay? So the reason we didn't go all in on him this particular week was because he was questionable himself the first couple of weeks. He's been on the injury report, some soft tissue injuries, banged up a little bit, just like every other receiver in Tampa. And we hadn't seen him get anything down the field. It's all these really short targets, right, Dinkin and Duncan. But you know what? He caught 12 of 13 targets, and he was the go-to guy, and that's what we've been waiting to see. Even if they're not deep downfield shots, if he's going to get peppered with targets and become one of Brady's favorite, receivers, I think it's safe to say that's a good thing for fantasy. So he only wound up with 87 yards on 12 catches, which is kind of what I was talking about. But in a full PPR format, that is still gold for you. That's 20 points just on that alone. And then he did catch a touchdown. Now, take with a grain of salt his production because like half of that, including the touchdown, came on the very final drive of the game where they had to go down the field just to try to score. So I'm not going all in on Gage, but I was high on him during the draft season. As I mentioned, got a ton of him in best ball, got a ton of him. Every time we mock draft, I was drafting Russell Gage as my fourth receiver, third receiver sometimes. So I do believe there's something here. Gage is a solid PPR pick. I just wouldn't go overboard to get him in half or even standard leagues. Now here's a surprise. We have to talk about Mac Hollins. That's right, the Mac is back, although he was here early here. I mean, Mac Hollins is a guy who's bounced around from team to team. Philly, he was with Miami for a little bit, and now he's with the Raiders. Well, he's making an impression with the Raiders because we did know this. Coming out of camp to start the season, he had secured that wide receiver 3 spot. So we know, of course, all the high-end talent in Vegas. Obviously, Devontae Adams there now, Hunter Renfrow solid in the slot, and Darren Waller at tight end. But there's really just not a lot after that. Hollins, you thought maybe he just earned that spot by default, but he has impressed. He's got a connection with Carr. So this explosion didn't just come out of nowhere. So this particular week, 158 yards. All right, that is something that, other than Devontae Smith, he would have been the highest, yardage receiver of the week. Okay, so this is something where he was going to over and over again. He didn't just inherit some of Hunter Renfrow's targets. He vastly outpaced and out-targeted Devontae Adams. This is not something anybody saw coming. All right, but he actually had a decent week the week before. He had 5 catches for 66 yards in week 2. So he's been getting attention from Carr. And again, the fact that he didn't just get a few targets here, he was by far the leading receiver on the team. He's making Waller look irrelevant. He's out producing Devontae Adams, so we have to pay attention. Mac Hollins, definitely worth a pickup. And then if there's a chance that Jamal Williams is still on the waiver wire in your league, go grab him. Now, here's also a player, kind of similar to Herbert I mentioned earlier, not going to get you as much of a ceiling in PPR leagues because he just doesn't catch the ball that often. But this is a guy who just continues to score touchdowns. And it's aggravating if you're a DeAndre Swift owner because, yeah, he'll vulture the short yardage work. But here's the thing. DeAndre Swift probably is not even healthy because he was only out in the field for 7 carries. You've got to think Swift is still not good. And this has been a recurring issue with Swift, kind of nagging injuries, not going full throttle. And so if Swift is banged up, Jamal Williams, we'll see what happens. All right, he's going to get the bulk of the workload, and he handled it very well in this week. He had 20 carries for 87 yards and 2 touchdowns. All right, so Williams always has that touchdown upside, and we know that he can handle all those touches. You know, if Swift isn't playing, it's going to be pretty much all Williams. Guys like Craig Reynolds aren't really that relevant. All right, Detroit's offense has looked pretty good, and they're going to get some good matchups again throughout the year. So if Jamal Williams is out there, he isn't really even like a handcuff anymore. He's a timeshare back with Swift. You know what? It wouldn't surprise me at this point. He gets more carries by season's end than DeAndre Swift. And then finally, if you're struggling at tight end, let's say you need someone to fill in for Dalton Schultz, maybe if he misses next week, or you just need an upgrade at that position, I get it. So look at Tyler Conklin. This is a guy we didn't think would really do a whole lot in New York, but he is. He's the leading tight end, not CJ Uzoma. And even despite all the talent they have at receiver, Conklin continues to be one of the top target getters. And there's a lot of passes being thrown on that team, as long as Joe Flacco's there at least. We'll see if that continues with Zach Wilson. But look, a good pass-catching tight end is any quarterback's friend. So Tyler Conklin had 8 catches for 84 yards in this last game. That was the leading yardage total. He had more yards than Garrett Wilson and Elijah Moore and all the other receivers together. So that obviously says that he's being favored by Flacco. And now in 3 straight games, he's had at least 7 targets. That's what you want to chase, right? You think he doesn't have upside because this is not an elite athlete. This guy's not really scoring a touchdown. You always want to chase the volume, the target share. That's where you get fancy production. Touchdowns will come and go. You're not going to predict a touchdown. A guy might score a touchdown, get you 10 yards. That's not helping you as much as a guy who can get you 8 for 84. So Conklin looks like the real deal. He's going to continue to get targets. So if you need a tight end and he's out there, he's probably going to be your top option. All right, those are my top picks for Week 4 waiver wire. If you want to join us on Tuesday night, we'll talk about all things waiver wire, give you our advice, and answer your questions before waivers run. And of course, don't forget our Week 4 playlist with all the advice you need to set those winning lineups.